Hola, cage fighting connoisseurs. This is Kid Native Bloody Elbow, joined once again by Connor Rubish and Zane Simon of Bloody Elbow to talk about the one, the only MMA Vivisection of UFC Fight Night Arlovski versus Bigfoot 2, or Arlovski versus Silva 2, or UFC Fight Night 51, or something. Anyway, it's happening Saturday night. It's happening in Brazil. It's happening on Fight Pass. And we're going to break down every fight, headlined by a rematch between Antonio Bigfoot Silva and Andre Arlovski. They fought in Strikeforce in 2010. They meet again Saturday night. First up, general thoughts on the card, Connor.
I mean, it's kind of I guess this card kind of sums up what everyone in the combat sports world's thoughts are, which is that why would you watch the UFC when you can watch Floyd Mayweather fight? Right? You know what I mean? I don't know. Like, the one thing that surprised me looking through
Mayweather
this
going to be fighting in Brazil. That's Dana White's answer.
But here's the thing that actually surprised me. Of course, I looked over this card for the first time at the start of the week, which is really as much time as you have anymore to prepare for these things. And I said immediately just shook my head and thought, I don't know who half of these people are. I really don't. Especially all these Brazilians, and I guess it makes me a xenophobe, but I get their names mixed up, and they all have similar surnames and everything, so I can't keep track of these guys, and there's so many of them now. But what surprised me is that in doing research for this show and looking through the fights, there's actually some pretty solid matchmaking throughout this card. A lot of these fights they make a lot of sense style-wise, or they make a lot of sense records-wise, and I predict that we'll probably get some decent competitive fights that may not be the kind of squash matches we usually see on Brazil shows. So we may actually see a pretty quality card if perhaps you're interested in skipping all of the fights on the Mayweather card before the main event, which you could totally do because most of the Mayweather undercard fights suck. So this card might make a nice precursor to Mayweather versus Maidana too.
With the exception of maybe 2 cards in the last 4 years that Mayweather's featured on, that's been my approach. Just watch the MMA all the way up to the main event, and then turn on 2 screens, watch MMA and Mayweather. All that, I bet they wrap this up before the Mayweather fight itself.
I bet they will, for sure. That probably won't start till after midnight.
And so, Zane Simon, are you going to, in your heart, I know you're going, God damn it, Nate, why did you let Connor talk first? Is that? Come on, admit it. You can just admit it. No? Add something to those brilliant insights Connor dropped on.
I was looking for some information on Leandro Silva, so I just kind of tuned the whole thing out.
Nerdy obliviousness is always an answer. That is a very effective defense. So what do you think of this card on the whole?
Yeah, it's all right. It's nothing. I mean, it's a Fight Pass card. I'm glad it's a Fight Pass card. It's the kind of thing that we should be seeing on Fight Pass. A lot of well-matched, competitive fights against guys that you couldn't pick out of a lineup to save your life.
It's like a Friday Night Fights card, which is kind of what I imagine these Fight Pass cards are supposed to ultimately be.
Yeah, and it's got an awesome headliner that I'm happy to watch. I mean, well, maybe not awesome. Andre Arlovski's well past his sell-by date, but it's a headliner that I see Arlovski, Bigfoot, and I think I'd like to watch that fight again.
Well, for reference on the care, don't care, I think we had 5 shared cares. Eugene had maybe 6 or 7, but he's an admittedly easy touch. And I didn't care about the main event. He did. The first time these guys fought, I think definitively answered any questions. Arlovski, I don't think it's improved since then. I don't see anything different happening. So I'm a little bitter about the main event, but they don't have a lot to work with. So
it's a Fight Pass card. That's the thing to me. This is a Fight Pass card. Top to bottom, this is exactly what they should look like. This is the kind of thing that they stick over in Macau, and the same sorts of just one slightly interesting headline fight, and then a bunch of stuff that they've got to get these guys fights. So
and let's be clear, for a card with no name value, this is far from a UFC China card.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? At least when we have guys whose names we have trouble recognizing from Brazil, we can be reasonably assured that they've come out of something like Jungle Fight, or they've come out of some
Shoot to Box or Nobody Now.
Right, or Nobody Now. They've got some association with, some experience with. And I'll mention this later on the card, but the one thing I love about Brazilian fighters, which American MMA still has not figured out, which is strange because American boxing does it very well, is they understand how to put together records for Brazilian fighters. Brazilian fighters, like Renan Barão's record, who are half of those people? But fighting them prepared him to be a UFC champion, you know what I mean?
Yep. I agree completely. And the Japanese are the ones who really never figured that out because you get a new Japanese star fresh out of Pancrase, the new champion. His record is 18-7.
You got a new Japanese star fresh from pro wrestling. His record is 0-1. Give him the Crow Cop.
yes, indeed. Indeed. So let's get down to it. First, there's 5 fights on the preliminary Fight Pass card, which I find to be a meaningless distinction. To me, it's like you've got a Fight Pass card, just put it all in one stream. Why do you make me stop and download a new stream? But anyway, Bantamweights, Hani Yahya versus Johnny Bedford. To me, this is like the mighty have fallen. Hani Yahya is a guy from the WEC days that, was in title talk, never got a title shot, but one of the world's best grapplers. Fallen on hard times. Here he is opening the card. What does it all mean? Zane Simon, you go first.
Yeah, it does mean that Hani Yahya has fallen on hard times. I mean, he was legit Henzo Gracie black belt.
Hickson.
That's right, Hickson Gracie.
Even better.
Legit Hickson Gracie black belt, ADCC champ. Just really solid fighter, and there was a time even not long ago, I would say, right in that, he went on that 3-fight run where he beat Grisby, Hirota, and Clopton, where it looked like he had started to kind of find his rhythm, and since then that looks more like a late career hiccup than some great second wind. It just seems like he's always suffered from a seeming lack of urgency and motivation when he fights. He's easy to get stuck in positions where he will not work to any meaningful end. And his striking has been something that seems to be picking up and going along, and then suddenly it'll all disappear and go away, and he'll just have none of it. And Bedford's, this is a fight they've been wanting to make over and over again. It's a fight that makes sense.
Well, they made it once, and it was a 39-second no contest because of a headbutt.
Yeah, and then they tried to make it again, and it fell apart. And I want to say they tried to make it again, and it fell apart.
Somehow I had PTSD'd that completely out of my memory, so...
Yeah, this is a fight that they've been trying to make happen. And they finally are getting it, hopefully, this time. And it's a good, Bedford's a guy who will push Yahya in all the ways that Yahya hates to be pushed. Bedford's swarming, he's aggressive, he is not super powerful, but he attacks with the kind of relentless pace and aggression that fighters who aren't prepared to match it will wilt under. But he's also very much a front runner, very much a bully, very much somebody who can, if you can push back against him, can be taken down. So at this point in his career, it's a fight that I think Bedford wins, but it's a good. It should be a good, interesting action fight between guys who really need a win right now.
All right, and Connor, if you've finished sipping your tea or whatever you're doing over there...
This is Diet Coke, my friend. I'm not healthy enough to drink tea.
Diet Coke. Have some aspartame on me.
I agree with Zane, and I would like to say that, per my comments earlier, I think that this fight perfectly sets the tone for the kind of fights you find throughout this card, which is that these guys are not going to be contending anytime soon. They're not really prospects. But this is kind of the perfect match for both of them. I think this fight makes a lot of sense based on what we've seen from Yahya and Bedford, and based on the fact that the last time this fight was made, it fell apart. One person's head fell apart anyway, partially into the fight. Not the kind of ending you want. So I like this fight. I think this is a great way to open the card. I don't know. I think for me, Yahya, all that potential he had, it just seems to have gone away and kind of melted into passivity. I think that was kind of the biggest thing that marked his loss to Ninamaki, when we expected Ninamaki to really have a tough test, and that was a split decision. But I don't really remember that fight being super competitive. I kind of remember Ninamaki just cutting through Yahya's guard and just working top control, and Yahya just kind of being content to play from the bottom. And for a guy who was such a such a standout submission artist earlier in his career, even submitting Eddie Wineland back in the WEC, Yaya's kind of just turned into a passive jiu-jitsu player who is just content to let you do what you want to him and try to catch you in his submission. It's not really he seems to have lost his desire to take the initiative in the fight, and that's going to give him some trouble against Bedford, because Bedford is an initiative-only fighter. Like, Bedford only fights going forward. And he can wind up in trouble. He got his clock cleaned in his last fight against Cody Gibson, but he also hurt Gibson in that fight, and he is just a swarming little monster when he gets his rhythm going, and it doesn't really take him long to get his rhythm going. He's a fast starter. So I have to agree with Zane. I think that this is a good fight for Bedford. I think Yaya has it in him to win this, but I definitely favor Bedford here. And both of these guys, I mean, just to praise the matchmaking again, I know this isn't like a world-beating fight or anything. This isn't amazing, but you look at the losses of both of these guys, none of them are really embarrassing losses. They've got, for Yaya, it was Benavidez, Mizugaki, and Mendez, and then the least impressive one was last against
Ninamaki.
Against Ninamaki. And then for Bedford, we've got, we've got Figueroa and Caraway, which are solid guys to lose to, and then the least impressive one is the untested prospect in Cody Gibson, who is actually a pretty solid fighter. So two guys who have lost to good fighters who aren't quite top fighters. They both need this fight to prove it. I think Bedford walks away with the win, and I'm kind of feeling a knockout for him.
Wow, bold words. The odds makers agree. They've got Bedford as the favorite anywhere from -140 all the way up to -165. Hani Yaya, the underdog, anywhere from +120. +115 all the way up to +135. Nothing's just making me itch there to lay down a bet. We're getting the odds from bestfightodds.com. And that brings us to welterweights. Paulo Thiago, Sean Spencer. Again, how the mighty have fallen. Once upon a time, Paulo Thiago was fighting the likes of John Fitch and Josh Koscheck on main card pay-per-views, Diego Sanchez. And here he is, after putting together a pretty epic losing streak, I must say, down on the bottom of the card against Sean Spencer. Is this the end for Paulo Thiago? Connor, you can go first this time.
Short answer to that question is yes. I think this is absolutely the end for Paulo Thiago, which is sad to see. I know a lot of people have really fond memories of Thiago and his hilarious knockout of Josh Koscheck. It's really hard to see a guy with that kind of potential fall so far, but he really just doesn't seem to have it anymore. I mean, he's a guy who you consistently watching his fights, you look at him and you're thinking, what are you doing? What's your plan right now? What are you really? He truly looks like he's just in there to get a paycheck. And to be honest, when you've deteriorated as much as Thiago has, there are much easier ways to get paychecks. And he doesn't. I mean, does he even need it? He's still a police officer, isn't he?
Yeah, he's in the Brazilian Special Forces, and I'm sure he had a busy time clearing out the favelas of teenage punks before the World Cup soccer games. So maybe that's been some of the distractions from the day job.
Maybe, but I mean, I don't know what happened to Thiago. Still, though, I got to praise the matchmaking here. I think this is, if you're going to continue to give Paulo Thiago fights, this is the perfect kind of fight to give him. Spencer is a guy who his only real weaknesses tend to be in submission grappling on the ground, which is the only thing that Thiago has going for him anymore. And Spencer is a busy striker, but he's not really a knockout artist. He's got enough power to keep you honest, but he's not going to be like Brandon Thatch or like who else has put Thiago away recently? Or like Bahadur Zada, you know what I mean? He's not going to just like lay a huge shot on your chin and your head flies off into the stands of vengeance-hungry favela dwellers. So I
a little bit of Luke Thomas there.
I like Sean Spencer here. I think it's pretty impossible to pick Paulo Thiago at this point. I think Ghassan Umalatov, who he lost to in his last fight, is quite possibly the floor for UFC talent. I don't think that there are any fighters who are unequivocally worse than Ghassan Umalatov, and Thiago could not beat him.
What about Brian Houston?
No, I don't think Brian Houston is even worse. No, Brian Houston had more. He's not, but Brian Houston even showed like talent when he had his last UFC fight. He looked like a guy who just needed more experience. He's clearly physically talented and has some skills. Umalatov does not belong in the UFC, and Paulo Thiago could not beat him. So I'm expecting Sean Spencer to win pretty handily here with a basic sprawl and brawl strategy, and I'm also expecting this to be Thiago's last fight in the UFC, which I think will be best for him. I really hope he stops fighting at this point.
And Zane, your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, Umalatov, he did look a lot better against Thiago, but it's telling that Paulo Thiago kind of also made Ghassan Umalatov look like a monster out there. It was just like, whoa, Malatov's really beating the piss out of Paulo Thiago. I mean, this is a guy who, just could not handle who was Neil Magny at all. Was it? Yeah.
Yeah. He had nothing for Neil Magny.
Yeah, nothing for him. So Paulo Thiago is, he's definitely operating well below the baseline for UFC talent right now. And Spencer is not. I mean, I kind of put Spencer's high watermark, and I know people have been like, "Oh my God, what are you talking about?" But like, he's got the he's sort of built in the Bisping mold of like.
I was going to compare him to Bisping just before, actually.
Yeah.
I totally agree with that.
He's got decent enough striking and the kind of output and cardio and low power, but he's putting together a solid game in that. Like, he seems to be able to take a shot, and he seems to be able to work his game consistently round after round, and Thiago's just well faded beyond the point that he's going to be contending with guys who can win in the UFC, and that sucks. I mean, barring some major renovation where he just, we find out that he's had diverticulitis or something,
and he has his colon replaced and comes back with
poop
bag, and it's all better.
No, there's no like. There would have to be something. Paulo Thiago would have to have totally.
Titanium and adamantium skeleton is implanted by the Canadian Secret Service, and
that wouldn't make him better. It would just make him unkillable. He would still lose. He'd still lose. He just wouldn't spend as long in the hospital afterwards.
All right, so everybody's picking Sean Spencer. The odds makers agree. They've got Spencer favored from -175 all the way up to -174, all the way up to -213. Paulo Thiago, the underdog, plus 145 all the way up to plus 164. Still much better odds than he faced when he made his UFC debut against Josh Koscheck. Anyone who cleaned up on that is probably lying, because I don't think anybody bet on Thiago to win that first fight. All right, and that brings us to lightweights: Francisco Trinaldo versus Leandro Silva. And I believe, Zane, it's your turn to go first.
All right, this is a slightly unfortunate, I don't know, fight for me. I think I was much more interested in it in its initial machination than it is now. It's not a bad fight, but Leandro Silva is, I don't know, he was kind of hailed as a favorite to win in his season of The Ultimate Fighter that he was on. He was on like a Tough Brazil 2, I believe. And he didn't really pan out. He got a shot in the UFC and lost to Ildemar Alcantara by virtue of Alcantara being way bigger and stronger than him and just kind of pressing him into the cage and grinding him down. And I'm not entirely sure that enough has changed since then to keep that from happening here. I mean, that was a welterweight. This is a lightweight. But Trinaldo's a huge, huge lightweight. And Leandro Silva, he's scrappy. He's a kind of, he's got some decent striking skill and some decent submission grappling, but I think he's one of those fighters who kind of misses that transition wrestling and transition offense to really put that all together. So
you're just missing the 5-fight win streak he's reeled off in the 18 months since he was cut by the UFC.
Yeah, he has reeled off a 5-fight win streak.
It's 14 months. This is what you're talking about, being able to build a record in Brazil.
Yeah, and so I do think he's good enough to fight on this level. I just don't know if Trinaldo's the right kind of matchup for him to win against.
All right, and Connor, your thoughts?
I'm glad you mentioned the building a record, because this is absolutely the fight that I had in mind when I was thinking of that. Because we look at Leandro Silva. Maybe we should just call him Buscape, because there's about 300 Leandro Silvas.
Yeah.
We look at Buscape's record, and he had that tough loss to Ildemar Alcantara. Not a fun fight by any means. It was pretty damn dull, and even the Brazilian fans were booing that one in Brazil. But looking at that fight, it really looked like Alcantara, a light heavyweight, fighting a welterweight in or rather a middleweight fighting a lightweight, because Buscape was just so outsized by Alcantara. And then if you actually look through the records of the guys he's fought since then, it makes absolute sense the way that his team has been putting these fights together. You've got a guy with only 2 fights under his belt before he fought Silva. What a perfect comeback fight after your first and only UFC fight up to that point, because he got cut right after that. And then we've got a guy with 5 or 6 fights in his with only 4 fights in his record as a professional. And then we've got guys who are veterans who don't have winning records. And then we've got a tough guy coming off a loss. Like, these are very smart fights to put a guy through after suffering a tough loss. And so what we're going to see, I think, is not only the intelligently reduced in weight version of Buscape, because it really makes sense for him to be fighting at lightweight, considering the huge welterweights there are in the UFC. But we're also going to see a guy whose team has effectively built his confidence, because that is something that is really undervalued in fighting sports. As a fighter, ego is so important, and to take a loss or a bunch of losses in a row is absolutely crushing to a fighter's confidence sometimes. I always think of a boxer, Gabe Rosado, who's one of my favorite boxers. The man is absolutely beautiful to watch fighting. Very technical, great positioning. He can knock people out. He can counterpunch. He can pressure fight. But he just wanted to fight world title fighters and stuff like that over and over and over. And he fought like Gennady Golovkin and Peter Quillen, all these tough guys, and have all these tough losses in a row. And he phrased that as him having too much heart, and that's how a lot of fighters are. So it's good to see somebody's team counteracting that and saying, no, you're not going to go back and fight another UFC level guy. You're going to be rebuilt and learn to feel comfortable in this new division. So I actually like Buscape in this fight for that reason. I think he's going to come in a lot more confident in his second bout in the UFC. And the problem I see with Trinaldo is that I really think Trinaldo is something of a one-round fighter when he feels confident early. We saw that when he fought Piotr Hallman, and I really think the biggest reason for that loss is that he just gassed trying to finish Piotr Hallman. And I don't think it's beyond the realm of possibility that, being as big and as strong as he is, he'll be able to overwhelm Buscape early. But Buscape is a very difficult guy to finish. He's very resilient. He's very scrappy, as Zane said, and he's got an excellent, well-rounded game with a number of submissions himself, which is what Trinaldo struggled with against Hallman the last time that he blew his wad early and gassed out. So I actually like Buscape in this fight. I wouldn't bet on him, but I think he's got a solid chance here.
Important caveat: the first time our panelists have split, and the odds makers, they like them some Francisco Trinaldo, although the dude's 36, and I think he's 36 going on 41, because I don't trust that age count. So he's the favorite, minus 172 all the way up to minus 212. Buscape's the underdog, plus 145 all the way up to plus 160. And that brings us to George Sullivan and Igor Araujo. They are welterweights. George Sullivan trains under Kurt Pellegrino in New Jersey. So, Connor, your turn.
Hey, Zane, why don't you take this one first?
What? This is flagrant cowardice.
Just a suggestion. I just
all
want to hear
right.
Zane's thoughts.
It's yours, Zane.
Okay. This gets back to the whole like bad card, good matchmaking kind of thing. This is honestly a pretty good fight right now for both these guys. Sullivan coming off a loss to Mike Rhodes, who is sort of is Patrick Wyman's prodigal son at the moment. But Sullivan is a big, seasoned, tough, powerful vet coming off of the
Didn't Sullivan beat Mike Rhodes in his last fight? That was kind of the second disappointing.
Yeah, that's what I said.
Oh, you said a loss to Mike Rhodes.
Oh, a win over Mike Rhodes, yeah.
Damn it, Zane, get your shit together.
Okay, George Sullivan's coming off a win over Mike Rhodes, whatever. You people know what I meant. You people
Facts, reality, it's all.
But he's kind of a big, really tough, durable vet. I think it was Ring of Combat, I want to say he was coming off of, or one of those East Coast promotions. Oh, CFFC, I think.
Yeah, CFFC.
CFFC. He's coming off. he's a seasoned vet, has a lot of wins over good, solid competition on that circuit. That's actually a really tough circuit that they have over there in the East Coast. A lot of those promotions have a lot of really unheralded guys who are fighting a lot of other really tough unheralded guys. You don't get a lot of the best records, but you get a lot of guys who have been fighting at a high level for a while. And Araujo has been fighting all over the place, a lot over in Asia and in Europe, for a Brazilian jiu-jitsu grappler. And he's got kind of a funky game. He likes to work in the clinch. He's got some good clinch offense, and then he's got an aggressive submission game. He doesn't have a lot of the other tools that meld that together, but he tends to pick up wins. He tends to pick up wins in fights that are made for him to win, I guess I'd say. I mean, guys like Danny Mitchell, he's going to beat every single time.
Oh, for sure.
Sullivan's probably the kind of guy that he loses to, much like Ildemar Alcantara, who Araujo also lost to. Sullivan's just a big, tough, grinding welterweight who can outmuscle Araujo in his best areas, keep Araujo off him, and stay out of the ground game. So I expect Sullivan to take this.
All right, Connor, now you've had your cheat time. What'd you learn? What do you got?
I learned that I agree with Zane. That's about...
What is this kid Nate guesting on the Sure Dog Roundtable? Like, you can't pull his
No.
Like, come on, kid.
I do like Zane's analysis. I think that the fact that Araujo does kind of thrive in the clinch, which is where he gets his takedowns and where he kind of wears people down, is going to cause him to struggle against Sullivan, because Sullivan is such a muscle-bound welterweight. Sullivan's another guy who looks like a freaking light heavyweight. He's a pretty solid. He's built like a brick shithouse. And what's that?
I was gonna say, you know what? I actually screwed up. He lost to Alcantara, which throws a little of my analysis off here. So take that for what you will.
We may be inaccurate, but we're honest.
Araujo beat Alcantara. Alcantara lost to Araujo.
Oh yeah.
What is that? What was it a split decision or unanimous?
It was
unanimous.
Unanimous, huh? All right, go.
But I still agree. I think that Sullivan's just kind of had a tougher test. I think all the guys who come out of that Ring of Combat and Cage Fury and all of he's actually done the Ring of Combat and the Cage Fury circuit actually, and done well on both of them. And I think that that's one of the that's kind of like almost more reliable even than like RFA or Legacy. Like, those guys don't really get taken care of. They get put through difficult matchups. It's kind of like a guy coming out as like a Cage Warriors as a Cage Warriors champ and coming into the UFC. Like, if you're going to have a guy coming from Ireland or from the United Kingdom, that's the kind of organization you want him to come out of. If you're going to have a guy coming out of Brazil, you want him to come out of Jungle Fight or something like that. So I place a lot of stock on that kind of experience, because those guys do very intelligent matchmaking over there. And when a guy comes out as a tough and largely winning veteran from that circuit, that says a lot about him. And I personally like Sullivan's experience more than Araujo. I think that Araujo beating Mitchell and not being able to finish him is about kind of sums up his whole fighting style. And then for George Sullivan, fighting Mike Rhodes and beating him, and he wasn't really supposed to beat Mike Rhodes, sums up his career as well. I think we've got an overachiever versus somebody who's largely been fed easy competition. So I like George Sullivan here too.
All right, so it looks like the Brazilian fans might be in for a bit of a long night so far, because in every instance where we've got an American fighter going into the Brazilian Lions Den, you guys, at least one of you is picking the Americans. So the odds makers, however, like themselves some Araujo. So if you believe our panel, you might have some action on Sullivan. Araujo's favored minus 167 all the way up to minus 209, which is kind of a tempting line. And Sullivan is the underdog, plus 140 all the way up to plus 153. And that brings us up to Godofredo Pepe versus Deshaun Johnson at featherweight. Deshaun Johnson, the guy bloody elbow exposed for having the most padded record of any American fighter we'd seen debuting in the UFC, and his UFC debut was not auspicious, controversial, and ugly. Who wants to talk about this first?
I guess they're trying to get Pepe back on track. Because that's really the only explanation for this matchup, or they're trying to have a good reason to get Deshaun out of the UFC, because This Deshaun Johnson is not a. He's a guy who has talent, but he's a guy who has had absolutely no means of actually gaining fight experience. This is the antithesis of the kind of records that Brazilians put together. When you're for a lot of Brazilian fighters, it may be tough down there, but they are cultivating a record. They're grooming a fighter for future success. When you just give a guy records so that you can sell him to the UFC at a higher price, and you're just feeding him cans over and over to beat, that does nothing for him as a fighter. That's not an investment in the same way that these Brazilian records are.
And some of the allegations about that promotion are off the hook. It looks like if you're a crackhead in that neck of the woods, you can make a buck pretty quick by getting in the cage.
And you can do it 3 times in a month. You can just
brain trauma. Just get in there, take a beating from Deshaun Johnson, and off you go. Anyway, so you're picking Pepe.
Yeah, and he didn't. I mean, Pepe didn't look that great in his last fight. I kind of think he got a. I hate to say a lucky shot. He threw a knee and he intended to land it, and it did land. So props to him. But it didn't really appear that he was comfortably beating Noad Lahat either. I think Noad Lahat was winning that fight up to the point that knee landed. I think Pepe's greatest strength in the feet is that he's incredibly wild, and that's also his greatest weakness. He's hard to predict if you're not experienced, and so he might catch you and drag it down to his realm or knock you out. And if you are experienced, like Jeremy Stevens, he's like Sam Cecilia, getting my Brazilians mixed up again, then he's relatively easy to put away and counter. So, I mean, how can you pick Deshaun Johnson in this matchup? He just doesn't have any kind of meaningful experience. And Pepe, for as up and down as his record has been, is a guy with respectable UFC experience and respectable experience in against other veteran fighters in Brazil. So it's Pepe all the way.
All right, and Zane, do you agree?
Yeah, I mean, I would actually say these guys are pretty similar on the feet. I mean, Pepe's got a much better defensive style. One of Johnson's biggest flaws is that he just has no concern whatsoever for his ability to get hit in a fight. But I mean, the bigger thing here is that Pepe, for all of his defensive liabilities and wildness, is a pretty decent aggressive grappler, and Johnson's grappling is terrible and filled with liabilities. He has zero trouble giving up his back and his neck to dudes, because when he was fighting on the regional circuit, and I even watched this happen, in these XFC shows, I watched a bunch of those fights, and he would just give up his back under the knowledge that the guy he was fighting was so bad that there was no way that guy could finish a rear naked choke. Pepe does not have that problem. I mean, that's not something that's going to happen at this level. And I mean, at the same time, though, Pepe's, his career, he's 10-3, and he's wild, and this is about as low down the totem pole an opponent as the UFC can throw at Deshaun Johnson. So, I mean, Johnson's not going to win it, but what can you do when you sign a guy like that?
Yep. So, we've got Godofredo Pepe. The odds makers agree they've got him favored, although not that heavily. This might be a solid bet for the favorite here, because the odds go from minus 147 all the way up to minus 181. Deshaun Johnson's the underdog from plus 120 all the way up to plus 136. So for a guy that we think has zero chance of winning, those are pretty good odds for Johnson. So if you think that our panel's right and the odds makers are wrong, you might want to just throw your life savings on that fight. As always, don't get your advice from Kid Nate. All right, and now we're moving to the
life savings than Godofredo Pepe. That's solid life advice right there.
Exactly, and then you can just, I mean, at least you'll have a great story to tell people down at the homeless shelter. All right. So now we move to the 6-fight main card, which is also a Fight Pass card, kind of confusing, but 5 cards on the Fight Pass prelim, 6 cards on the Fight Pass main card. Starting with women's bantamweight Jessica Andrade versus Larissa Pacheco. Connor, you can go first on this one.
I just want to use this fight primarily as an example to point out how confusing Brazilian naming conventions are, because we have, I'm assuming it's Larissa, maybe Larissa, Larissa Moreira Pacheco. On her record is a woman named Laura Gonçalves Pacheco. How the hell are you supposed to keep these people apart? I really don't understand.
That's why they stick with the nicknames.
As a highly sheltered suburban American, I don't know somebody tossed me a line because I'm absolutely lost in these Brazilian Sherdog
I'm
records.
sure these Brazilians will be lost in a sea of Chads and Todds and
Oh God, Chads. Yeah.
Jennifers, so anyway, back to the
Okay.
fight.
Um, this fight basically exists on this card to fly in the face of my Brazilians are good at building records theory because Pacheco's record looks awesome until you start to click on the names of the people that she's fought and see that they're all either coming off of losses or they're very, very fresh. They're absolutely raw and new to the sport as a whole. Whereas Andrade, the pile driver, Bate Estaca is a killer. She's the female Vanderlei Silva. You know what I mean? She fights exactly the way that Vanderlei did back in his Pride heyday. She doesn't really have great technique or anything, but she is an absolute pit bull. She will come forward, she will latch on, and she will just swing away until you fall or until the fight ends. And I actually thought we saw a little bit of development in technique from her. She had some good body punches when she fought Raquel Pennington. She's the kind of fighter designed to take advantage of somebody who's inexperienced or relatively inactive, like Pennington, or I hate to say it, like Pacheco. So I have high hopes for Pacheco. She looks like a talented fighter, but I think that she's basically being fed to Andrade this time out.
And Zane, your thoughts?
Yeah, pretty similar. I mean, I would give Pacheco some credit in that women's MMA is generally like there are so few fighters out there that it's hard not if you want to like build a fighter at all, you basically have to give them inexperienced competition. And Irene Aldana is actually pretty decent. She just came on to the recent Invicta card and beat the piss out of Peggy Morgan, who was on the recent Tough season. So Aldana's pretty decent, but that's also Aldana was also probably beating Pacheco until Pacheco hit a third round submission on her. So that's kind of a testament to Pacheco. She's pretty wild on the feet. She tends to just kind of try to bull her way inside and do the whole wild hooks, trade leather, and grab on. She's very much a pull guard for submissions kind of fighter. And so, there's not a lot of skill there at the moment, but there's a lot of aggression. And that aggression against somebody like Andrade, who's a little more tempered and a little more technical. Not, Andrade is still also very much an aggression fighter, but she's got a little more skill behind her aggression. Should be the kind of thing that Andrade can really take advantage of. The only problem I would potentially see here is that Andrade is 5'2" and Larissa is, I believe, much, much, much taller. She's listed, 5'8".
But that's always the case for Andrade's fight. It
is always the case for Andrade, but but the thing is that some of the competition Andrade has faced, like Pennington and Sexton was actually her size, but Pennington was just is not very aggressive. She's not a very aggressive fighter. She tends to be kind of a mechanical stand-up fighter from the outside, and she really let Andrade bully her inside. And if Pacheco doesn't let Andrade just be the more physically dominant fighter, Pacheco could potentially overwhelm her, but I wouldn't look for that.
All right, and so the odds makers also. Actually, they've got a split here. They've got Pacheco favored. She's the underdog, or the favorite at -109 all the way up to -135. And Andrade is the underdog at -102 to -120. So kind of a mess. Or +100 all the way up to -120. So some of the odds makers have Andrade favored, some have Pacheco favored. It looks like a line that just hasn't seen a lot of action. And so probably just a few bets are throwing the line off there. And that brings us to one of the Alcantara brothers, the bantamweight Yuri Alcantara against Russell Doane. And Zane, you can go first on this one.
All right. I mean, I don't know. I feel bad for Doane. This is not a fight that is good for him at this stage in his career. He's kind of like, I'm not even sure he beat Marcus Brimage all that convincingly. I thought that was probably a fight that Doan lost.
So you're saying beware of Sean Shelby bearing free tickets to Brazil.
Yeah, Alcantara is a legit top 10 bantamweight. I mean, he may not be a title contender, but he's got legitimate skill. He's a hard punching fighter with great timing on his feet and with a good sense of distance and timing. His stand up isn't technical. He's just kind of a wild, throws a lot of wild heaters, but his timing is there and his distance is there. And then on the ground, he's kind of a monster. And Doan is a guy who likes to come forward and then likes to depend on his jiu-jitsu to get him out of bad scrambles that he puts himself in. And Alcantara is tailor-made to either catch him on the way in or to just take him down and outwork him on the ground. Doan's a more technical boxer, but he's not going to stay at range and stay smooth on the outside, I don't think. I think he's probably going to try and rush in on Alcantara, and this could be an ugly, quick loss for him.
And your thoughts, Connor?
Yeah, all the stuff that Zane said. Yuri is by far the more impressive of the Alcantara brothers, and he's just an absolute killer. He's got solid striking. He was really competitive with Uriah Faber, which is absolutely no joke. Uriah is consistently the second best guy in the division. He's always up there, and so to just even compete with him, it says a lot. And he almost finished Faber in the first round of that fight. If I remember correctly, he had him in back control. He had a choke locked on, and Faber just had to use his strength and his insane scrambling ability to escape. And he was still relatively competitive throughout the rest of the fight. And Doan, yeah, I agree with Zane on that one too. I thought I had Doan losing his last fight to Marcus Brimage. I didn't think he did enough to win. He had a lot of trouble with the counter striking, particularly the kicks of Brimage. Those leg kicks were eating him up all night. And I think that Alcantara is just a more active, far more powerful striker than Brimage. And you know what I mean? He's kind of got the strengths of Brimage in that he's athletic and strong, and he's well-rounded. He's just all of that, but like a couple degrees higher. And if Doan struggled with Brimage, he will very likely get finished by Alcantara. So I'm going with Yuri Alcantara, and I'm kind of feeling a knockout.
Yeah, I'm kind of lathered up for that myself. The odds makers agree they've got Alcantara favored anywhere from minus 285 all the way up to minus 388. Russell Doan is the underdog plus 220 all the way up to plus 269. And that brings us to the man I hate to blog about, Santiago Ponzinibbio. I think with Darren Unyanama out of the UFC, Ponzinibbio now, I think he always had the worst name in MMA personally, and he's taking on Wendell Oliveira Marquez, and this fight is at welterweight. So, Connor, you can talk about this first.
Sherdog gives us two choices for Wendell Marquez for his nickname. We've got War Machine and Nagao. How much do you want to bet the UFC announcers do not call him War Machine during the broadcast?
Well, it's a copyrighted name.
For that matter, if you looked up what Nagao means, it's not much better.
What is Nagao?
It's basically just black. I mean, they're basically just Negroes. Those are his nicknames.
I was a little too shy to mention that his other nickname wandered dangerously close to a racial slur, but it seems like he's taken that into account. He's cool with it. Yeah. So what can you do? Let's just take the easy route and call him Wendell de Oliveira Marquez. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think that might be an elegant solution, because Marvel Comics will be calling if you try to call yourself War Machine.
Mike Goldberg isn't calling this fight, is he? Because Ponzinibbio and Wendell de Oliveira Marquez are going to give him fists.
I think it's Wendell Oliveira, though. Fortunately.
Yeah, okay. This is going to be Kenny Florian and John Anik, I guarantee.
Anik is good with names. I got to give the guy credit. He does his he does the very hard work of going up to the guy before the fight and saying, "How do you pronounce your name?"
And then he remembers it.
Yeah, he writes it down and remembers it.
Yeah.
This is a fun fight. I like this. Oliveira is on this card to reassert my claim about how Brazilian records are built up, because he has faced a who's who of regional competition in Brazil. Even guys coming off of losses are guys who have really just run the gamut of regional fighters in Brazil, guys with overall winning records, and he's beaten them. He's got a very impressive record, and his only His only loss in this long stretch of wins he has is to Guillermo Vasconcelos, who didn't he fight in the UFC recently? He
Yeah,
did.
he just lost
Yeah,
to Zach Rich, but Guillermo Vasconcelos is a pretty legit BJJ grappler, a long-time
exactly.
instructor at some of the MMA schools, and getting subbed out by him. I mean, that was one of the things that made Vasconcelos so impressive was that his
Yeah.
his 4-fight career was full of guys that had like 40 fights.
Yeah, he's kind of a prodigal son in some sense, and that he can come into MMA and have jiu-jitsu so good that he can beat veterans. So there's really no shame in anything on Oliveira's record recently. And then Ponzinibbio came into the UFC against like one of the most highly touted, most promising prospects in a long time, and hung with him. He certainly didn't come close to winning a fight with Ryan LaFleur, but he was relatively competitive. He showed really good takedown defense, good scrambling ability. He kept getting taken down, but he was very good at regaining guard, struggling, at making attempts to do technical stand-ups and regain his footing. I thought he looked really good. I think we're in for a fun grappling match here, and I really like the matchmaking here. Not necessarily a grappling match, but I think we're probably going to see Ponzinibbio look to get this one to the ground because Oliveira is a scary guy to deal with in the clinch and in close range with his short strikes and knees and things like that. Tough fight to call. I'm going to go with Oliveira. I love to see a veteran finally make it to the big show, so I guess it's more of a sentimental pick. But, I mean, really, this should be one of the more competitive, fun matchups of the night.
All right, and Zane, your take?
A lot. Basically, I wish I could be higher sold on Santiago Ponzinibbio because I do think that he's a very good prospect, but he's also a guy that's been around for a little while now, longer than it seems like, and he doesn't seem to have found his strength in the cage. Like, he started out as a pretty good sort of wrestler and submission guy, and that's how he was dominating guys because he was more physical than I think a lot of the competition he was facing regionally. And then as he's gotten to the UFC, he has some knockout power, but he's not a great striker. And his knockout wins, I think, have given him that mistaken identity that he's going to go out and brawl with guys, and training with Vitor Belfort probably hasn't helped that at all. That sense that he should just, he should look to be a technical striking powerhouse. And he ends up being kind of one of these, he's athletic, he's tough, but he's just going to go out there and try to bang with dudes. And Wendell Oliveira is a much better striker in that area. I mean, Oliveira stays a bit tall, and he can be a little bit clowny. He likes to kind of mess around and dance a little and some of that kind of stuff. But he's a very decent technical counter striker with good footwork, hard shots, and he can do a lot of like really hyper athletic stuff. Like I saw him, he hit like a handstand, the cartwheel kick, like the Thai style cartwheel kick in a fight, and he can do a lot of shit. So I'm looking for Oliveira to kind of be able to showcase himself a bit against somebody who shouldn't be looking to strike but will be.
All right, and the odds makers agree. They've got Oliveira favored anywhere from -120 all the way up to -138, or 115 up to -138, and Ponzinibbio is the underdog from +100 all the way up to +109. That brings us to the lightweights, Efren Escudero and Leonardo Santos. Let's see, Zane. We're going to go back-to-back Zane.
I talked second, so that's cool. I wish I could be more excited about Efren Escudero being back in the UFC. I mean,
he won the Ultimate Fighter one time, man.
I know, but if ever it feels like a distilled look at the UFC signing everybody and not like, just kind of dragging the net for anybody out there to fill in, this feels like it. I mean, I realize they have...
Well, they know Spike TV will want him because Spike looks at him as a guy like, look, we already spent hundreds of thousands of dollars marketing this guy to our audience, so we want him for Bellator. So UFC can't allow that to happen.
And he's already fought in Bellator twice and won. So, but I think which tells me he doesn't want to be in Bellator because he probably got one-off contracts to fight single fights and stay out of tournaments for them. But he has a recent loss to Dakota Cochran. His win over Luis Palomino was, I believe, notably panned. It was not a good win at all. And win over Juha-Pekka Vainikainen is decent, but not like Vainikainen's kind of a regional journeyman vet. It's not bad, but it's not like oh yeah, that's the kind of win that gets you over the hump. But Leonardo Santos is also not Leonardo Santos has gotten a lot better, but it's hard to be super invested in him. I think I would pick him to win this fight just because his striking has looked notably improved. He outstruck Norman Park from range in his fight against Park. That was the big improvement there, is that he looked like a much better range striker there, and Park kind of Park would have won were it not for his point deduction based on his superior infighting and range control and the fact that he's kind of a tree stump on the inside. But Santos is probably the more dangerous fighter between him and Escudero right now, and Escudero is going to be happy to probably try and work his range game for large portions of the fight, and Santos is pretty dangerous if it gets to the ground, so I'd pick Santos to win this fight.
And Connor, your take on this one?
Zane and I are just all buddy-buddy throughout this card because I got to agree with him there too. In fairness to Escudero, I think his loss to Dakota Cochran probably should have been a draw. He basically put it all over Cochran in the third round after giving away the first two. The downside there is that he gave away the first two and really only got the third because Cochran gassed. And just it was basically a lot of Escudero being content to play guard on the ground and throw up triangles and things like that. And he's got a really good chain submission game. He's very good at using, one threat to set up another on the ground. But it's just too much. You just can't do that anymore in MMA. Escudero's game just feels a little outdated when you watch him fight. So he's just, I don't know. He's not cut out for the UFC at this point. I hate to say it, and I'm relatively excited that he's back. I like watching him fight, but I just don't think he's cut out for it. And Santos was pretty impressive against Park. He didn't let Park take him down, and whereas despite his judo background, Park's takedown skills aren't exactly what you'd expect them to be. He's still a solid takedown artist, and his infighting more than makes up for that. It's very difficult to deal with the threat of his grappling, his high single takedowns and stuff like that, combined with the knees and short uppercuts and things that he lands on the inside, and just the grinding pressure. And Santos dealt with that pretty damn well, I'd say. Park to me is also kind of an up and coming guy. He's going to be pretty big, I think, in the future. He's gonna be a standout. So I hold Santos in high regard for that. I think Escudero is just outdated at this point, whereas Santos shows all the signs of improving, and I think this should be a pretty much a done deal win for Leonardo Santos.
All right, and the odds makers agree. They've got Santos favored anywhere from -200 all the way up to -245. Efren Escudero, the underdog, from +165 all the way up to +186. That brings us to the biggest lightweight in the UFC, Gleison Tibau against Peter Hallman. Connor, you can go first.
It's a good fight too. I'm actually warming up to this card the more I actually look through these guys' records and everything. I'm kind of thinking I might watch this instead of the boxing pay-per-view, and I'll just switch over for the fights I care about. Peter Hallman has always, since he started fighting in the UFC, has struck me as Ryan Couture if Ryan Couture was much better at MMA. Like, he's just, you know what I mean? Like, kind of awkward, weird kicking style. Not really a good striker, but he's just going to, or kind of like Court McGee. Court McGee is not really a clean or smooth striker. It's odd and robotic, but it kind of works for him. And Hallman is absolutely tough as nails. You cannot undersell getting up from 3 or 4 clean, hard kicks to the liver like he went through against Trinaldo, and to come back and still have enough gas and enough courage to win that fight when Trinaldo started to gas out, it says a lot about the mental toughness that Hallman has, and there's no shame in losing to Al Iaquinta either, and that was where the kind of fight where the holes in his striking defense, the smoothness that he lacks, was really revealed. Tebow is not going to press him in that realm. He's not necessarily a good striker himself. He's serviceable on the feet. He does enough to get into the kind of range that he likes, which is for the wrestling. And I mean, what can you say about Gleison Tebow? I mean, a win over Pat Healy, not as great as it might have seemed a couple years ago, but then a win over Jamie Varner, win over John Cholish, win over Trinaldo. Like, these are good wins. And then losses to Michael Johnson, Evan Dunham, Nurmagomedov, Jim Miller. Like, he doesn't lose to bad fighters ever. So it's a very tough fight to call. I mean, you look at the kind of guys that Tebow loses to, Hallman doesn't really seem like that kind of guy. But I also think that Hallman, I mean, if you can take 4 clean kicks to the liver and not gas out and keep coming forward, that can really be an advantage against a guy who is well known as being one of the biggest weight cutters in the UFC. And eventually that's got to catch up to Tebow. I have to think it does. That knockout at the hands of Michael Johnson, something's got to give eventually. So I actually kind of like Hallman in this fight. I think he's got a little more momentum coming in, despite that tough loss to Iaquinta. He's got the submission skills, I think, to give Tebow trouble in the later rounds, and I think he can more than hang with Tebow on the feet, and I think he can probably stop his takedowns too. So I like Piotr Hallman in this, probably by decision, if not a late submission.
Wow, I'm kind of surprised by that. And Zane, your take?
This is a tough fight because I think on surface to me it does look like exactly the kind of fight that Tebow wins for 2 rounds and then loses the 3rd round. I mean, that's how he wins whenever he wins. So, the question is really for me though, just, I mean, Hallman is good enough to overcome Tebow's ability and to win this. He is, but I'm not sure that he's actually shown that yet. I mean, it depends on, I guess, how much he's improving, because he is sort of at a point where I would be looking for him to actually get demonstrably better fight to fight. You know, he's been in the game for about 5 years. Sometime in the next year or so, I'd be looking for him to really start hitting his stride. Does that happen here? Is this a fight where that really gets him over the hump and suddenly he's somebody we talk about as an upper half of the division, maybe not top 20 or anything like that, but somebody who sticks around and really makes a mark in the UFC? Or is this, a setback on the way to getting there? And this is such a tough fight to call, because I really, I do think Tebow wins early. Still looks great early in fights. He's still, he strikes with power. His striking has gotten a bit more technical enough to win early, and he is physically dominant. But Hallman is tough, and he's strong, and he strikes well. And the best thing for him is that he actually chains his wrestling. He's unlike a lot of guys coming off that European circuit. He actually goes to the single, to the double. He changes angles. He'll switch in on takedowns when he's trying to get them, and he chains his wrestling well. So if Tebow gasses, Hallman has exactly the kind of tools to take advantage of that.
And he's a proven late finisher. He's got several actually meaningful late finishes.
It's true. Given all that, I think I would actually be swayed to take Hallman. He's the kind of guy who will keep pressing late, and Tebow's exactly the kind of fighter that fades late. So this is an interesting fight, and it's one that I would tentatively pick Hallman to make a late run at, but it'll be a late run. Won't be like, I don't see him coming in and being a front runner and steamrolling.
Well, it sounds like you need to call your mom's broker and put a 3rd mortgage on mom's house, because Gleison Tebow is pretty heavily favored here, minus 219 all the way up to minus 266. Our panel, however, likes Peter Hallman, the underdog, plus 180 all the way up to plus 197. So, like I said, throw it all in this fight. This could be the big one. This could be your big break. Mom won't even miss that mortgage. She, Won't even notice. Anyway, and that brings us to the main event, one that I gave a don't care. Andre Arlovski versus Antonio Bigfoot Silva, rematch their 2010 Strikeforce fight. I don't feel like Andre's improved. I feel like this is just a placeholder fight for Silva, who's somebody who's lost to Cain Velasquez badly and isn't going to be getting any title shots anytime soon. He's lost to Fabricio Verdum, too. So there's just, what do you do with a problem like Bigfoot? And it looks like you put him in there with Andre Arlovski to get an easy win in Brazil. So who wants to talk about this first? Connor?
Yeah, sure. Depressing. This is a depressing fight. It just kind of, it's coming off probably...
Unless you're Tim Sylvia. Tim Sylvia is going to be glued to his TV, rooting for every blow stroke against Andre.
But I got to be honest, I think this may somehow be the most depressing part of Andre Arlovski's career. Even
saying something.
Yeah, even after that terrible streak of losses that he had back in between 2009 and the final knockout loss to Haratonov, I still think this might be a sadder portion of his career because he's just kind of like floating around against unimpressive heavyweights, and he did not deserve the win against Brendan Schaub. I mean, I hate to even say it because that was a terrible fight from everybody, but Brendan Schaub deserved that win. Arlovski, I got to be honest, the only way Arlovski won that fight is with some kind of telekinesis, because I don't even know how he busted up Brendan Schaub's face so badly. I don't know what clean punches he landed. I think Schaub was like running into Arlovski's forehead with his face or something, because Arlovski just didn't do anything. He looked so incredibly tentative and nervous. This is a guy who I think in the past has had some pretty serious confidence issues. I think that explains a lot of the struggles he had in his career. He's well known to be indecisive, switching from Freddie Roach to Greg Jackson's, doesn't know what he wants to do, doesn't really have belief in any of his methods, or does until they spectacularly fail him, and then he's willing to drop it and try something else. So we basically have a guy who, in his last UFC fight, his re-debut, looked like he had no idea what he was doing, and then we've got a guy in Bigfoot who looked like he had a really solid game plan in his last fight. He had a clear idea of how to take care of Mark Hunt, and Mark just gave him like one of the gutsiest performances of an incredibly gutsy career, fought through what could have been an early TKO to leg kicks and knocked Silva down. It was a crazy barn burner, and I think if anything that fight proved that Bigfoot can change things up and fight with a game plan when he needs to. And Bigfoot, it kind of redeemed his chin a little bit after those tough knockout losses to Cain and to Daniel Cormier, because he took some shots from Mark Hunt and did not go away. So, I mean, how do you pick against Bigfoot in this fight? To me, this fight just kind of gets him another win to set him up for another fight in the future. And I don't know if anybody else has suggested this, but after Bigfoot wins this fight, because he will, probably easier than he did the last one, I would like to see Bigfoot fight Ben Rothwell. That's a fight that I would like to see next. So, Zane?
And Zane?
Yeah, I think the only question for me with Bigfoot is this is his first post-TRT fight.
Good point.
You know, and coming off a failed drug test. And he's one of the few guys that there are, like Chael Sonnen, for whom there are serious questions of how does this guy fight without TRT. And Chael Sonnen's answer was that he doesn't. You know, he tried to do a bunch of steroids and cheat the system, got found out, and said, okay, I got to quit because I can't take anything. Does that happen to Bigfoot? It might. I don't know. I mean...
That is an excellent angle. Bigfoot has a pituitary gland, had a tumor on his pituitary gland. He's got, I believe it's acromegaly, which is the syndrome that causes your head to keep growing.
Gigantism.
Yeah, gigantism. And so he's had his pituitary gland removed, I believe, but that's affected his entire endocrine system. So, if anybody has a case for needing TRT, it might be Bigfoot. So excellent point, Zane. Go on.
Yes, that's the one worry. Beyond that, this is just a squash match for Antonio Silva to get him a win. I don't have a problem with that. Arlovski has, sure, he didn't look great against Schaub, whatever. I don't, it's heavyweight. I don't really, it wasn't a fight where I'm like, oh, Brendan Schaub's been done wrong. That man,
the fight was a shit show. I mean, if pulling the trigger, it would be different.
And so the big thing for me here, honestly, is that it gets Bigfoot, another win, keeps him relevant. I'm happy for that. He's a legit top 5 kind of heavyweight right now, and we need those guys to stay legit, to keep being active, to keep getting fights, to keep getting wins against name opponents, guys that we are recognizable. And then this does something good for maybe Matt Mitrione. It's got to do something good for either Matt Mitrione or Brendan Schaub, because both guys they're the only 2 winning heavyweights with decent experience in the UFC who aren't ranked right now. And Schaub just fell out of the rankings to give
Rothwell
a spot, which didn't make a lot of sense to me, because quite frankly that just kind of showed me that Overeem is probably vastly overranked, rather than the idea that Rothwell was way underranked. For Rothwell to go up to like number 9 or whatever was kind of like, well, I mean, look at who Overeem's been beating. Does that really say Overeem's like, oh yeah, he was top 7? I think he was ranked 7 or something. So to me, I think that the upside of this is that you get other people to recognize some of the heavyweights that have been putting in time and work, and stop giving so much dap to the old guard for just hanging around.
All right, and so everybody is picking Bigfoot Silva, and the odds makers really agree. They've got him favored from -400 all the way up to -388 all the way up to -509. Andre Arlovski, the underdog, anywhere from +300 all the way up to +360. +270 is the lowest odds. So it seems like a foregone conclusion. Of course, anything can happen in MMA, as Gus Johnson told us. So watch it on Fight Pass on Saturday to see. Any concluding thoughts on the card, gentlemen?
Yeah, if Arlovski beat Silva, that would be the most heavyweight thing to ever happen. That is so how that division operates. I was just realizing the other day how ridiculous it was that Fabricio Verdum beat Travis Brown in 2014. This is a guy who lost to Nogueira as an up-and-coming star in 2006.
Yeah,
but he submitted Fedor, broke the winning streak. So,
but I mean, in 2006, Fabricio Verdum was an up-and-coming star heavyweight. In 2014, he beat an up-and-coming star heavyweight. Only in heavyweight do guys have that kind of staying power.
These guys are fine wine. They take a long time. I think really heavyweights, I don't know if it's just because of difference in body size, but heavyweights consistently take a long time to really fully develop as fighters, and they stay a lot longer. I mean, even in boxing, Vladimir Klitschko does not look like he's ready to retire at all. Granted, there's nobody really in the world to test him, but he's nearing 40, or he may actually be 40. He's old, and but as a heavyweight, that's really not saying much.
Yeah, I mean. Mark Hunt is nearing 40, and he doesn't look any worse than he has at his best.
Yeah, absolutely. The heavyweight division is a madhouse. I mean, Ben Rothwell beats Overeem pretty convincingly, but he's not really convincingly a top 5 heavyweight. Bigfoot Silva seems convincing like a top 5 heavyweight, and yet when both of them fought Kane, Rothwell arguably did a lot better because he at least survived, whereas Bigfoot got crushed in under 2 minutes both times. How can you possibly sort out the rankings in this division? It's just crazy shit happening all the time.
Yeah, it's a crazy muddle, and the thing that's disheartening to me as a longtime fan is I think back 15 years ago, you had Fedor Emelianenko, you had Big Nog, you had real wave of talent coming in. Babalu Sobral was even fighting at heavyweight at that point, and I just haven't seen a wave comparable to that since then.
And even a lot of the guys that are still around were really hot back then. Like Haratonov was actually a solid mixed martial artist, and Verdum was just coming up, and what happened?
What happened there is that you had a division where there were very few really good athletes. I mean, you still have very few, but there were so few that you could get a lot of guys who were natural light heavyweights and even middleweights fighting at heavyweight competently and winning heavyweight fights against really bad heavyweights. And these days, I mean, the bottom of the barrel in the UFC, discarding guys like Ron Potts, are guys like Derek Lewis and, Jack May and guys who are like, 6'4", 6'6".
That's a good point. I think
And very
I
athletic. Yeah, somebody like Igor Vovchanchin isn't going to puff up to heavyweight and come in there at 5'9" and be knocking fools out like he was.
It's almost like all the people who would have been top heavyweights in like 2005 and 2006 are now light heavyweights. I think that's actually a very good point. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Cain Velasquez really is an artifact from a bygone era because the age of the small heavyweight really seems to be gone.
Or, I mean, but Cain Velasquez isn't even like a small dude, He has a natural.
He's small in this era.
He's small in this era, but he has there's a build you have to have for heavyweight. I think that's what we're finally at. It used to be that as long as you could put on the muscle, you could compete. Now you actually have to have the heavyweight build. There's like a specific body structure thing that has to be happening for you to compete at this level.
Yeah.
I think that's an excellent point. And on that excellent point, we're going to call it a day. We'll be back with the 6th round after the fight. And kind of right quick, pick, is Mayweather going to beat Maidana?
Yes. Yeah, probably.
Is it going to be any different than the last time? I mean, it was one of the more competitive Mayweather fights we've seen, but it was still a pretty clear win.
I agree. I thought it was a draw when I scored it live, and then rewatching it, I think I had it 8-4 Mayweather. I think he pretty clearly landed the better punches in most of the rounds. So either we're going to see Mayweather building on all of the experience he has at this point and doing what he did when he fought his last rematch, which was against Jose Luis Castillo. And in his first fight with Castillo, a lot of people thought Castillo won. Floyd came back with something to prove and just completely beat the ass off of Castillo, knocked him down, and all kinds of carnage. Now we've got a Mayweather who's not as athletic as he was then, but he's smarter, he's more experienced. I personally think he's better than he's ever been. We also, however, have Maidana, who is a model student of boxing. The guy learns very quickly. For all of his brawling appearances, he's a sponge, and he's under Robert Garcia, who's probably my favorite boxing trainer in the sport right now. He kind of does with lots of fighters what Freddie Roach did with Manny Pacquiao, where he just kind of refines aggressive guys and makes them just he's not a technical trainer, he's a tactical trainer. He turns guys who are good at beating people up into guys who are really good at beating people up.
And that sounds like fun. My $65 is flying out of my wallet as
it's the rest of the card is garbage. They took a cue from Top Rank and put together a complete shit show on the undercard. In fact, the free fight on Showtime Extreme is the best fight of the entire undercard, which is laughable. But Mayweather-Maidana should be a good fight. I think Maidana actually has a better chance than Castillo did of coming in with a revised game plan thanks to Garcia. They seem to be doing some really smart things in preparation, so we're going to have an interesting battle of wits and toughness on our hands. But you can't pick against Mayweather. I just can't do it.
Well, that sounds like fun. And Connor, will you and Scott Chris be doing a 13th round after the fight?
We will. We will be recording the 13th round immediately after Mayhem concludes.
All right, awesome. And in honor of the Mayhem fight, we're not going to do a 6th round for this UFC Fight Pass card, but I will be doing a bathrobe review on Sunday. And then Eugene will be back with Knuckle Up. And then I'm sure there's the UFC the following week, and rinse and repeat. So thanks, everybody. Adios, MMA aficionados. We'll see you next time. Remember, you can follow me at KidNate on Twitter, at TheZaneSimon, at BoxingBush, BUSCH is Connor. Read us on BloodyElbow.com and subscribe to MMANation.com on YouTube and give us a like, which is the thumbs up below the screen. Adios, MMA aficionados. This is KidNate.